Hello and welcome to Mixed Signals. I'm Max Tawney, media editor at Semaphore, and with me as always is our editor-in-chief, Ben Smith. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Max.
Today we have a special episode of the show. Ben and I are fresh off of hosting the Trust in News Summit in Washington, D.C., where last week we interviewed the chairman of the FCC and some of the most important decision makers in media. So we're going to play for you some of the biggest moments from the summit and talk about why the New York Times top editor still thinks that Trump is good for business, how far Trump's FCC is willing to go to regulate media companies, and why Megyn Kelly is clapping back at Ben on YouTube. Ben.
Do we have to talk about that?
We absolutely have to talk about that. That's the rules of podcasting. We're going to dig into all of that right after the break. So, Ben, we are back from Washington, D.C., where last week Semaphore hosted some of the biggest names in media. We had the CEOs of NPR and CNN. We had the top editors for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the head of news for NBC News. We obviously had the chairman of the FCC, who is looking into regulating multiple of those companies. And we had some kind of new media influencer-y type folks, such as Megyn Kelly and Mehdi Hassan on the left. And we also chatted a little bit about the point of the summit was to chat about the most important kind of question in media, the thing that you and I are both obsessed with, which is this kind of declining trust in news, Americans' terrible and worsening views of the media. We actually discussed some new Gallup information, which really put all of this in kind of stark relief. And before we talk a little bit about some of the more interesting and exciting moments from the summit, we wanted to really kind of discuss that data as well. Ben, lay that out for us.
Well, first I want to object to your Brett Baer erasure.
Yes,
Fox
of course.
News host was also with us. It's quite a list. Gallup kind of went back into its archives and just dug through their decades of data to sort of try to tell the big picture story. And there were really two things to me that I walked away with. One is that when people ask me about trust in news, I used to always say, well, look, like trust in news is down, but trust in everything is down. Trust in government, trust in the church. And so maybe this isn't about some micro decision we made, or it's not even specific to the news industry. I think if you look at the data, that is not as true as I thought it was. News has fallen faster, harder, deeper than anything else. Like we're now competing with Congress to be the least trusted institution in the country. And it's slipped very, steadily since the 70s, very dramatically since 2000. And it's, and the other thing is just very striking in the data. It is largely Republicans whose views have changed. And it's changed basically on a clock every 4 years around the election. It goes down, collapsed in 2016. And if you're looking for a really worrying sign, younger Democrats are now going along and they're sort of have lost their trust in media broadly. And I think, a lot of our listeners might ask, as Mark Thompson did, the CNN president, like,
do you yourself trust mass media?
I do, but I don't know if I'm a representative sample, though.
I don't.
That was one of several notable moments from the summit. But I guess I wanted to ask you this, Ben, though. Why do you think, in particular, people distrust news more than they distrust even, members of Congress who they hate or other institutions? Because I agree, I had the same assumption that it was basically that institutions, media being one of them, were just broadly declining in terms of Americans' views of them. But why do you think, in particular, we Americans find us to be more loathsome than even their most hated member of Congress?
Wow. The big factors which are across these things are, social and cultural and technological. But I do think the extent to which these huge changes in the way information travels just absolutely tore through media, and didn't just mean that people were getting news differently. It meant they were getting different kinds of news, that news organizations, the tail of social media sort of wagged the dog of the news, I think, to a degree that a lot of us didn't really acknowledge, a decade ago, and maybe didn't totally understand. And I think journalists do have to sort of reckon with how much conservatives came to see the media as their political opponent. Sometimes, honestly, cynically, and in a way to sort of, if there was information they didn't like, to discredit it. But sometimes I think also authentically. And I think that, that's that's a huge part of the whole situation.
Do you think as cable news continues to decline, as broadcast news, as viewership for these things kind of continues to decline and moves towards podcasting and things like that, do we think that the trust is going to kind of go back up because people consider, these people, this new generation of media to be more trustworthy in some sort of way? Or do people just not consider those types of figures to be, podcasters or YouTubers who many Americans get their news from? Do they just not consider them to be the media? And when they think about the media, they're thinking about, some political pundit who they don't like, or, someone on broadcast television.
Well, there's something to everybody hates Congress. Most people like their member of Congress. And I do think as media is more personalized, more direct. I mean, I kind of asked Megyn Kelly about this. I think she in some ways benefits a lot from people. They don't trust the media, and they're looking for a really obviously authentic voice saying what she thinks, who they feel they can trust.
Well, that was a very interesting answer, of course, from Megyn. But I want to save her for later in the show, because we have to get into you guys' beef, of course, in the way that no, look, this is how it goes. This is the new media environment. You say something on stage, then she responds in her podcast, then we respond in their podcast, and it just kind of endlessly continues in a cycle of mutually assured traffic and engagement. So.
You're so cynical, Max.
No, but I mean, there is obviously a huge ecosystem that's just built on podcasters responding to other podcasters, occasionally interacting with the normal world. But oftentimes a lot of this stuff is pretty self-contained. But before we get to that stuff, I think we should talk first about some of the biggest, most important, moments as they pertain to our listeners for our podcast, not just the fun beefs, but the really interesting, profound, and meaningful moments. The thing that we've talked about a lot on the shows, and the theme of this season of our show is really the changing business of media. And I thought that there was one moment that really touched on that and got at something that a lot of people are really thinking about now, which is this moment, this question that you had for Joe Kahn about Trump and his second term and what it meant for the New York Times. So why don't we play the clip and then talk a little bit about it?
Is Trump good for business again?
Is Trump good for business? News is good for business, and Trump, as we know from this first little more than a month, is the most news-making, person to occupy the Oval Office I've ever seen. That cabinet meeting yesterday was, whatever it was, an hour plus of riffing and Musk walking around and Trump, talking about the 5 or 6 things on his mind, was sort of probably the most newsmaking. Actually, that cabinet meeting that he had in the first term, where there were the pledges of loyalty and to him, was also pretty interesting. But it was this guy makes a lot of news, and it's really interesting. And some of it is fact challenged, and we have to correct that in as much of real time as we possibly can. But there are also opening up lines of inquiry into federal agencies and the functions of government that none of us have thought about since civics class, and is now part of the news cycle where we can dig in deeply. What does this agency do? When did it get started? What's its mission? Is it still living up to its mission? How much funding does it get? How much oversight or control did Congress have? Those are all issues in the news now, and they're all sort of unearthed by this disruptive agenda of Trump. So is it good for the news business? I think it probably is. It's raising awareness. It's raising people's attention to what's happening in their country. I think it's all, in that sense, from the perspective of journalism, this is a great journalistic opportunity.
Honestly, I really like talking to Joe Kahn, because unlike a lot of people you interview in the media, out of the media, he really does listen to your question and try to answer it. I mean, that's like, many people have had, years of media training telling them not to do that. But I think in this moment, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world. And yeah, I think this turns out to be great for the business of the New York Times. I mean, he didn't really go into detail, though, about what that business is, about where they see Trump taking them. Do you have a sense of that?
Well, the thing that I thought was kind of the most surprising was that, I think that this is a more nuanced answer than perhaps he had to offer. I think Trump may be good for business for the New York Times, but clearly he's not nearly as good for business this time around, right, as he was for the news business in his first term. Even though ratings are increasing for the cable networks, that are opposed to Trump, there definitely is not the same kind of traffic or eyeballs, particularly from people who are opposed to Donald Trump, as there was the first time around. And I thought it was surprising and telling that he was willing to say that actually, that the New York Times was, had seen some sort of uptick from Trump. And I think I was also particularly surprised because both Trump and Democrats like to point out, that Trump is good for these media companies' business. For Trump, he says, all these media companies, they're obsessed with covering me because I'm so good for them. And on the Democratic side, there are some partisan, Democrats, people who work within the Democratic Party who have said that the media was actually interested in Trump winning again because he was good for business for them. So I thought that it was interesting that Joe just, straight up said what's been true for them, which is that Trump, the second time around, is benefiting them once again.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I sort of asked him a version of something that Les Moonves said maybe in 2015 when he said, Donald Trump may not be good for America, but he's good for CBS. But I agree. I mean, obviously there is a Trump bump, but there's also like a delta between this Trump bump and the last Trump bump. And where are those people?
I have kind of a theory on this that I actually want to bounce off you that I think is that I've been working on, which is I think that the first time around there was a tremendous interest in the things that Trump was doing, not only because it was unpredictable and he didn't really totally know what he was doing. So he was making a lot of news by kind of fumbling through things. And there was a kind of an awe and a shock that people kind of felt, watching some of these things. But I think that there, especially as Trump's term moved on, there was an undercurrent in some of the coverage and narratively that a story could come out that could be so bad that it may force Trump to be removed from office. I mean, I think that this was the undercurrent of the Mueller investigation and various other scandals that kind of befell the first administration.
Right. The notion that the New York Times, the Washington Post just reveal what's really happening, that will stop Donald Trump.
It might have some sort of consequence that could result in serious changes and his removal from power. And I think that I don't think that anybody is under that illusion this time around. And I actually think that you're seeing the results of that in the lower ratings. And I think that people are just not, I don't think that there's a segment of the audience that thinks that some story in the Times or the Post is going to move the needle so much that, Trump might be removed from office. I don't know. Do you think that that's true?
Yeah, I think that's totally true. And people are sort of looking to a different kind of media to reckon with this. Although I think, as you say it, I think I'm the last person who thinks actually, good reporting will still wind up and reality will still wind up, may take a little longer, but ultimately just spewing not either, for anyone, any political figure who's sort of spewing nonsense on Twitter, that at some point the reported reality catches up with you because it matches people's actual life experience. But maybe that's naive.
Well, one thing that's certainly not good for business for these for these media companies, some of which benefited from Trump's first time in office with larger audiences, is Trump's FCC chairman, Brendan Carr, who joined us and who gave quite an interesting interview talking about the ways in which he wanted to use his kind of regulatory power over some of these news broadcasters in a way that's really striking fear into a lot of them. Why don't we play one of the exchanges between you and Carr?
It sounds like the argument you're making, but correct me if I'm wrong, is that the FCC in the previous administration was acting against, or at least looking into conservative media inappropriately, and that you want to right the ship by inappropriately looking into liberal media.
What I'm saying is the FCC is a place...
No, but really, that's not what you're doing.
What I'm saying is the FCC is a place that operates by case law and by precedent.
Yeah.
And these cases and precedent that were developed over the last 4 years were apparently not controversial when the Democrats were in charge. And I'm surprised that applying the same precedents is now considered controversial.
But you thought, you said at the time, you thought they were partisan and inappropriate, basically, right?
There are things that the FCC does that once they do them, that creates the precedent, that creates the case law, that creates the thing that the FCC is supposed to follow. What we're doing right now is following the law that the FCC has developed over the last 4 years. But I'm surprised that it's controversial now, but wasn't then.
It's funny. When I talked to I feel like I'm being trolled here. And when I talk to
By me?
yes, and when I
People
talk
rarely
to,
call me a troll.
I
but
talk
okay.
actually. It's funny because I
Does
did talk
happen.
to a lot of your friends and enemies in preparing for this, and
Okay.
and one
What'd
thing
they tell
that
you?
well, one thing that all of your friends and your critics alike said was this is a really smart guy, good lawyer, really pleasant to work with, whether
Not
you're a
good
Democrat
looking.
or
Not good
Republican.
looking, apparently.
Didn't get into your physical appearance. But that they're a little, but that when they look at your kind of public presence on cable, on social media, that you're kind of bombastic and trolly. You talk about shock and awe for the swamp, patriot versus patriotic Americans, and they wonder if it's performative for the president.
Look, I think I joined the FCC as a staffer in 2012. I've had lots of different jobs there, lots of different opportunities there. I think if you look at everything that I've been doing, it's consistent over the course of my conduct over years.
But just to go back, 'cause I think the point you were trying to make before was important. You were saying that there were precedents of, essentially, in your view, partisan persecution of conservative media outlets that were set, and that you are now applying to sort of institute partisan persecution of liberal media outlets. Is that literally what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that we're coming out of a period, in my view, where there was a lot of weaponization at the FCC. Your last name dictated the FCC's treatment. When Elon Musk got an award for $800 million to bring high-speed internet to rural America, the FCC, in my view, for political reasons, revoked that award. And the loser there was the American people that were supposed to get service. Now, if your last name was Soros, you got very different treatment. So Soros came in at the end of the Biden administration and purchased 200 radio stations. And for the first time ever, the full commission gave a special Soros shortcut for him
But so
to
is your
obtain
goal
it.
to reverse that or to end it?
The FCC is a place that operates by case law and common law. And when we set precedent, the agency follows it. And that's what we're doing. We're giving everybody
doesn't this just
even-handed...
mean that the next Democratic chairman is bound by the same case law to turn around and go after Fox and Sinclair?
Well, again, the last FCC was the one that sought public comment on not reviewing a Fox broadcast license. The last FCC was the one that didn't
It sounds like you're
renew any
choosing to
Sinclairs.
deepen this cycle rather than try to end it.
I'm happy to apply the case law that the Democrats set.
Interesting.
Ben, what did you think about his response there?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it comes through in the clip. I was really genuinely surprised. Like, I've asked a lot of politicians that question of, like, your predecessor did did what you say is a bad thing. Are you going to do bad things? And they always say no. I mean, that's the answer. And he basically said yes. You know, that's the precedent. We're going to apply it. It was really interesting. I mean, it really got a lot of attention in that world. One of the spokespeople for the free speech group FIRE came out and sort of issued a statement, said 2 wrongs don't make a right. I think some people will see it as totally cynical and insincere and just sort of a thin excuse for him to target Trump's enemies. I think other people will see it as a reflection of, like, how deeply people in the conservative movement feel that the Biden administration targeted them and that they are sort of justified in a kind of retribution. But I do think there are 2 things. One is that the FCC only regulates the weakest parts of media. It only regulates broadcast and, television broadcasters and terrestrial radio. So there is a sort of odd thing to this, that the most muscular, most in some ways aggressive Trump official going after the media only can touch what are already the weakest parts of the media. It's kind of a strange irony there. But the other piece is just, I mean, there was really no pretense of saying I'm trying to be fair and nonpartisan here. And I did, and I do think that, do you sort of see where that leads, right? Brendan, he was very willing to mix it up. He stayed around for the reception, as did Catherine Maher, the CEO of NPR, who's one of his big targets. This is Washington for you. They didn't chat, but they were both sort of hanging around talking to people for a while after. And I sort of cornered him by the buffet and asked him, wait, what are you going to say to Brett Baer from Fox when some future, John Fetterman administration, no, maybe not Fetterman, but some future Democratic administration is harassing him. And when I interview their FCC chairman, he's going to say, I'm just doing what Brendan Carr told me to do. And he said something that I kind of found, if you're looking for some shred of encouragement, he allowed that maybe some kind of mutual disarmament might be nice. I mean, I do think the actual mutual disarmament here is that we do have a First Amendment of the Constitution, and his actual power to regulate speech is more limited than he thinks it is in the end, or than he will sort of publicly say it is.
Don't you think that but don't you think that just by him telling you that afterwards, off stage, Don't you think that kind of confirms one of the things that you had asked him, which is this all just kind of a performance for the president? Because he wasn't willing to say that on stage, right, when he was in front of the cameras, and he was kind of evasive. But afterwards, he made a point of, maybe some consolation.
I don't know. I mean, I do think there is a thing if you work for Donald Trump, you just have to perform the most absolutely over-the-top version of yourself, and the only risk is coming across as conciliatory to your job. But the other thing is that this isn't like some academic interview. This guy is an incredibly powerful government official, and we had a bunch of the people he regulates in the audience. And if you're the CEO of a public company or executive at a big company, and you hear that and you think, hey, maybe he's joking, maybe he's trolling, maybe the First Amendment will protect me, but maybe there's a 30% chance he's going to do huge harm to my business unless I comply with what he wants, which is say whatever he wants about President Trump or invest where he tells me to invest. It's called jawboning, which is a legal term that is, controversial. A lot of these companies are just going to do it. They're going to see that interview and they're going to say, all right, this guy, I don't know if he's serious or not, but there's enough of a chance that he's serious about testing the limits of the First Amendment that we're just going to go and preemptively say nicer things about Donald Trump just to get out from under his lens. And that's that I think is the real power and sort of somewhat scary thing about a lot of what the administration is doing.
Absolutely. Though, of course, it is interesting to me that, despite the fact that some media organizations have tried to essentially placate Trump, that really hasn't stopped Carr from opening up or reopening investigations or public comment into them. One example, obviously, being Disney and ABC. Disney settled this lawsuit, that Trump had against the network and Stephanopoulos. And just a few weeks into Trump's second term, Carr reopened, that investigation into ABC. So clearly, just being nice to Trump isn't enough to get you out from under the FCC's regulatory eye.
Isn't that reassuring, Max?
Let's take a break, and then we'll discuss a little bit more right afterwards.
Today on our branded segment with Think with Google, I spoke with Google's VP of Marketing, Josh Spanier, about how marketers can deeply integrate AI. There's been an enormous amount of experimentation in marketing with AI, and I think less really deep integration. I think people are ambivalent about it in some ways. How should companies and marketers think about that?
I think 2025 is the year that some of the AI wins and benefits become mainstream. We worked with BCG, who interviewed many, many companies who are really deploying AI in a deep level already. And what they found is that deploying AI is driving 30, 40, 60% revenue growth where it's actually being applied. Those numbers are real, the business cases are real, and it's actually very, very exciting to see this transition from that AI hype into AI how and AI impact.
What's concretely actually driving that growth?
So in part, and reading the BCG study, it's really coming down to deeply integrating AI, not just dabbling and experimenting. We spent 18 months experimenting, doing tests, and what we're seeing is there are companies who are actually truly becoming agile in deploying AI in a number of their process systems, their number of consumer-facing systems and tools and solution. From a marketing perspective, it's really about ramping up the scale at which you can operate and the speed at which you can operate. So generating hundreds or thousands of creative variations, which are indistinguishable from the old ways of working, but allow you to reach to different audiences in different ways in more engaging and relevant moments. Doing that incredibly fast and efficiently is actually driving real-time business impact and is becoming a standard way of working. That deep integration. It's not just, we did a test. It's actually, we did the test, we've proven it, and now we're scaling it and repeating and optimizing each time.
Where can people learn more about how to do this?
This whole report is actually a really fascinating read. You can go over to Think with Google and look for AI Pathways on thinkwithgoogle.com. Search AI Pathways and you'll find this report between Google and BCG. Something that's kind of fun to do, and if you want to experiment yourself with AI, go to Think with Google, get the report, and then also open up Notebook LM, another Google AI tool, and drop the report into Notebook LM, and it will create a 10 to 12 minute podcast version that is absolutely fabulous, so you don't have to read the whole report yourself.
Yeah, that is a remarkable tool. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Ben.
One person who's outside of the regulatory eye of the FCC, as you mentioned, is Megyn Kelly, who used to be on Fox and on NBC, and now has kind of created this kind of third career arc as a YouTuber and a podcaster on Sirius XM. Has built quite a career for herself. We've written about her quite a bit in the media newsletter, and she joined us for one of the more interesting and lively segments on stage. But she wasn't happy with your interview, Ben, which is of course very sad because it seemed kind of quite a little bit friendly up there. I didn't think it seemed particularly prickly, but she obviously felt differently.
Well, I like Ben. I have to say, my own experience was Ben doesn't understand what we're doing at all. He's still stuck very much still in legacy media. And I would submit to the audience that his questions to me showed that. It also showed a lack of familiarity with what we do here on this particular show and what I sound like in anchoring this show. It does not appear that he is a daily watcher. It appears he's been consuming his information about us from left-wing blogs, which is, I guess, not a surprise. But I personally felt that was a really grossly unfair characterization, that I just thought it was very slanted against what we do here. And he obviously, I think, has an upturned nose when it comes to digital media in general.
God, I'm so unready for this new world of fighting with people on podcasts, and particularly fighting with Megyn Kelly on podcasts. So I gotta watch. I'm totally unafraid of Brendan Carr, honestly, but I'm gonna watch my words here. Because what's funny is I thought she was actually quite interesting and impressive, and I did kind of push her and play devil's advocate a bit. But yeah, do not turn. I don't think as the longtime editor of BuzzFeed News, I'm really allowed to turn my nose up at digital media. I mean, I do think you catch a glimpse there of sort of her gift for turning that conversation, which sure, I like a slightly confrontational interview, and pushed her at times, for finding the points of conflict and really elevating them and making and highlighting them and bringing them to her audience.
Do you think that she did that because she was actually was she actually upset, or do you think or are you just saying that she's doing it because it's fun content and she gets to beat up on the lame MSM such as yourself?
Honestly, knowing Megyn a bit, I see her at the Jersey Shore occasionally. I think it's totally authentic. I don't actually think there's maybe she dials it up a bit on screen, but I don't really think I don't think she's a cynic or in that sense. I don't think I think that the reason that she's so successful is because that she's tapped into this authenticity and just dials it to 10 or 11 or 12. I mean, maybe it also is possible. I'm just saying that because she was relatively nice to me. She said she thought I was a nice guy. Semaphore was pretty good. Kind of annoyed about the interview, which meant I only got 20 emails from her fans suggesting I leave the profession.
Did you? But did she get you though? Did she? Or was the only way that you were consuming her show through liberal blogs, or have you been watching the Megyn Kelly show to
No, I'm an occasional. I listen to the podcast, but I'm an occasional listener. I didn't even know there were still liberal blogs. Honestly, is that still a thing? I think if anybody, I would say if anybody is a little out of touch with today's media, I mean, blogs that's a real 2009 reference.
It is true that I do think that the outlets that clearly are writing up the clips from the Megyn Kelly show that you can kind of Google and find are definitely all kind of lean right. It's the New York Post or the Daily Mail, and they're Megyn Kelly eviscerates Don Lemon over whatever.
Yeah, that actually is honestly that is to the extent that I'm seeing her sort of out in the world. It is more she's sort of crossed over into being a in the way that morning show hosts of broadcast used to be, somebody who can just say something and have it be news. She and Piers Morgan, I think, have that ability in the new media, which is a bit of something a bit new, actually. No, the question that I don't know if this was the question that she was annoyed about, but maybe the one that was most this isn't the old way, sort of confrontational, was a question that a couple of I did ask people in her old colleagues, in the broadcast TV, what they made of her now, because we were speaking to an audience that included network people. I kind of was curious how she would explain herself to them in a way, and so I did ask her about both about her appearing on stage with Trump, which is something that certainly at NBC, but even at Fox, they would never have let her do. And I asked her something about how hard she goes at other television personalities. Just said run it into another TV personality, actually, of course, at a DC cocktail party, who said that they were, really kind of shocked that Megyn can get so personal about other TV people when there's sort of a gentleman's agreement that they don't attack each other, which I hadn't even really known. But Megyn really truly scoffed at that one.
I think that seems like the one that really maybe pushed her over the edge was that particular one, was the idea that she was getting more personal than these than the other hosts.
Well, sometimes
that one,
in an interview, your job is to allow people, if they would like to go over the edge, to go there.
No, but I actually kind of maybe want to take her side a little bit on this, not in the sense that I think that she
God.
doesn't. You're
ganging up on me and your team, Megyn. Unbelievable.
I certainly am not. Let's back up. Let's play the clip and then let's talk a little bit about it.
Years ago, protesters went to Tucker Carlson's home. I think you probably both remember that pretty vividly. You called it at the time stomach turning and said it has to stop. But it's funny, I was talking to another broadcaster the other night, and she said, one thing Megyn does that is most of us don't do is go after other people in media really personally. Like there's sort of a gentleman's agreement in a lot of media to not attack each other personally. And that I don't know if you think that's true as a broadcast person.
Why don't you do me a favor and Google Megyn Kelly NBC and tell me whether the journalists
you recently
don't
talked
go after
about
each other personally.
Madaw's public complaints and sort of said that she should put up or shut up, basically, but also about her expensive real estate, about her homes. And I'm curious, do you have any compunction about getting that personal?
No. I would never give out her address. That would be a bridge too far, and it doesn't compare to what happened to Tucker in any way, shape, or form. But Rachel Maddow got out there and tried to act like, I'm a woman of the working class. I'm here to represent the poor staffers who could lose their jobs now as a result of Joy Reid biting it. And meanwhile, she's collecting $25 million a year. She's got multiple homes worth millions. You know what? Why don't you take a $2 million pay cut and save 10 of those jobs? If you feel that sad, you don't even have to pay it out of your bank account. Just tell them, pay me $23 million next year instead of $25. She won't do it. She wants to seem virtuous and sanctimonious, but in fact, she's only the latter because she won't actually put any money on the line. And an example of the exorbitant life she leads while she's trying to remind us, I've worked so many jobs, the jobs I've worked, puts to the point her hypocrisy.
To her credit, to a certain extent, I don't think that she gets more or less particularly personal than other people on TV. I think one of the ways in which new media is a lot like old media is the fact that there is a closed ecosystem of people constantly responding to each other on television, particularly between Fox and CNN and MSNBC, which really, Fox really for years has made a big part of what it does, coverage of other media outlets. I mean, you even saw this with the fact that Fox sent multiple media reporters to come and cover the summit and write about for certain things. But I think that Fox in particular has always gone after personalities. Fox anchors and hosts are always constantly criticizing personalities on other networks. I mean, they, Hannity and Tucker, I think Hannity specifically would refer to Brian Stelter, the CNN anchor and host, as Humpty Dumpty on his broadcast. And people would, then they would shorten it to Humpty. They would and his audience all knew who he was talking about. So I think, to a small amount of Megyn's credit, I don't think that she gets more personal than other hosts on TV, particularly those who came up at Fox.
Yeah, and she does get unbelievably negative coverage at times too. I think I'm going to give you and Megyn this point. That was grossly unfair. See, this is why I can't really be a podcast influencer, because I'm often like, well, actually, you know what, you have a point. You're probably right about that, which I think just doesn't work for this ecosystem where, and honestly, just to sort of, discuss the conversation that we had before the show, we were talking about should we discuss what Megyn said, and we were talking about, if we want more views to the podcast, we've got to create more meaningless controversy. But the nice thing about our model is, as we talked to Chris Balfe about, we're just trying to reach a relatively small number of just very level-headed people who are deeply interested in the substance but have no interest in drama between, minor media personalities.
We don't need to juice the numbers by having you do the YouTube Mr. Beast face and doing Ben Smith semaphore claps back at Megyn over dishonest editing of Semaphore News Summit. We don't need to do that.
Maybe I could be baited if she comes back at us. I don't know.
I don't know. I think that she'll start to see diminishing audience on that.
I think in a slightly less cynical way, I have always, since the beginning of my career, been kind of pleased when someone bothers going after you. You're like, all right, I think
means that you're in the mix.
Thanks for reading.
Yeah, you're in the mix. Let's end on this point, which is, what did you make of Megyn and to a certain extent, Mehdi Hassan, who is also up there with us, talking about their large and growing audiences that they've put together in just a few years. And both of them, by many accounts, have created pretty impressive and pretty stable independent media organizations that in some ways are more in the bloodstream than some of their older kind of legacy competitors. Megyn was up there listing off how much bigger some of her months were than NBC and ABC and whatnot all put together on YouTube. What did you make of what the new media folks had to say about their audiences as they compared to old media, and whether their audiences were larger, more influential, and their businesses therefore might kind of grow to eclipse some of their legacy predecessors?
Yeah, I mean, one thing about both Mehdi and Megyn that you can tell is they're just having so much fun. Like, I do think they're still downsides. They're running small businesses. They're vulnerable to YouTube algorithms and stuff. They're taking bigger risks than people who have long-term contracts at big companies. But also you can just see the extent to which the wind is at their back, and they're just thriving on this, real organic, passionate connection with an audience that really loves them. I mean, that's amazing. They're having a good time in media. That's just not true of everybody. I would say, though, maybe the person having the best time right now is Bret Baier. Like, he was just, I mean, he had to leave early because he had to get out at the exact end of our interview because he was rushing off to interview Keir Starmer, having interviewed Macron and Zelensky also that week. And for all, like, I do think, I mean, that independent ecosystem is exciting and powerful and sort of where the future of the business is pointing in a lot of ways. But there is this funny resilience to these institutions. Like when Macron and when Starmer and when Zelensky want to like reach America and reach Donald Trump, right now they are going on Fox.
That's true. And of course, Bret Baier, when asked by you if he should be a YouTube star, had a very definitive no answer.
I think he said he had never thought about it for 1 second in his life.
That's a pretty clear and direct answer.
I don't know, Max. You've been asking me questions. Did you have a sort of one moment that stuck with you?
I thought that the most interesting part of the summit was the way in which the worlds of older legacy media and these big cable broadcasters really did not flinch at the fact that they were in lineups with a Substack, a popular Substacker, and that, the chairman of the FCC kind of backstage was as familiar with Mehdi and his what he was doing independently on Substack as he was with Catherine Maher, and that these worlds are coming together and intermingling quicker than we can create content about them. And as soon as we produce a podcast or write something, the world is already changing. And and it definitely struck me that people like Thompson and like Cesar Conde, who is also there, are very clearly looking for ways to make their businesses and somewhat like those put out by Megyn and Mehdi and the independent folks who can move quickly and operate at lower costs. I thought it was really interesting to see those worlds kind of brought together and representative of the broader media ecosystem and the way that things are changing.
Fascinating.
Well, that is it for our bonus episode today. We will be back with our regularly scheduled episode this Friday, which means you get 2 this week. Thank you for listening to Mixed Signals from Semaphore Media. Our show is produced by Sheena Ozaki, with special thanks to Max Toomey, Britta Galanis, Chad Lewis, Rachel Oppenheim, Anna Pizzino, Garrett Wiley, Jules Zern, and Tori Kaur. Today's episode was mixed by Steve Bone, and our theme music is by Billy Libby. Our public editor, of course, is Brendan Carr from the FCC.
He seems like he wants to be everybody's public editor. But if you like Mixed Signals, please follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and feel free to review us.
If you want more, you can always sign up to Semaphore's media newsletter, out every Sunday night.